The chill seeped into Lady Eleanor Vance's bones, a familiar companion in the decaying halls of Blackwood Manor. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating peeling wallpaper and faded tapestries. She traced a pattern on the cold stone sill with a gloved finger, the grit of forgotten days clinging to her skin. The scent of damp earth and aging wood hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of their family's slow decline. Her gaze drifted to the overgrown rose garden beyond, a tangle of thorns where once vibrant blooms had thrived. Every corner of their ancestral home whispered of a grandeur long past, a legacy now crumbling around them. Eleanor smoothed the worn fabric of her morning gown, a garment once fine but now mended countless times. Her fingers, accustomed to the delicate work of needle and thread, paused. She felt the distinct, familiar pull of her mother's locket beneath the cloth, resting against her skin. It was a small, tarnished silver disc, warm from her body heat, a constant weight and comfort. She imagined her mother's youthful face within it, a ghost of happiness from a different time, a time before the debts began to mount like an insurmountable mountain. A soft knock at the study door startled her. It was Thomas, the aging butler, his frame stooped, his face etched with worry. "Lady Eleanor," he murmured, his voice a low, hesitant rumble. "His lordship requests your presence." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Her father rarely summoned her to the study anymore, not since his health began to fail alongside their fortunes. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, began to unfurl within her. She knew this summons would not be for a pleasant conversation. Every recent conversation had been laced with unspoken anxieties, with forced cheer that did little to mask the fear in her father's eyes. She walked the familiar path down the long, dim corridor, her footsteps barely audible on the threadbare carpet. The air grew colder as she neared the study, carrying the faint metallic scent of old ink and neglected ledgers. The heavy oak door, once polished to a gleaming sheen, now bore the dull patina of age and neglect. She pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. Lord Vance sat behind his large, imposing desk, a formidable piece of furniture that now seemed to dwarf him. His shoulders were slumped, his usually proud head bowed low. The flickering candlelight from a single candle cast long, dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the deep lines of worry around his eyes. A half-empty decanter of brandy sat beside a stack of official-looking papers, their seals broken and scattered across the dark wood. The air in the room was thick with the smell of old paper and the cloying sweetness of the brandy, a bitter combination that tightened Eleanor's throat. "Father," she said, her voice soft, trying to inject a lightness she did not feel. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and swollen, the kind of eyes that had seen far too many sleepless nights. He waved a trembling hand towards the chair opposite him. "Eleanor, my dear, please sit." His voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. A fresh wave of apprehension washed over her. She sat, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could feel the pressure of the locket digging into her chest, a physical manifestation of the impending storm. He cleared his throat, a sound that seemed to tear at him. "My daughter," he began, his gaze fixed on the papers before him. I have failed you. I have failed your mother's memory. I have failed this house." He picked up a document, his fingers trembling, and stared at it as if it held all the answers to his ruin. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat, waiting for the inevitable. She knew deep down that this was not a confession of small mistakes. This was something far grander, far more devastating. "The harvests, the investments, they have all turned against us," he continued, his voice cracking. "Lord Ashworth, he is relentless. He demands payment. Immediately." Eleanor knew Lord Ashworth. He was a man of cold calculation, his eyes sharp and unforgiving, his patience as thin as their remaining coin. She had seen him in the village, his portly figure always impeccably dressed, his gold-tipped cane tapping a rhythm of judgment against the cobblestones. The thought of him circling their family, ready to swoop in for the kill, made her shiver. "We have nothing left, Eleanor," Lord Vance finally admitted, the words spilling out in a rush, thick with shame and despair. "The estate. It is mortgaged to the hilt. The lands, they are all forfeit. Blackwood Manor itself, he means to seize it, to sell it for scrap. His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Eleanor felt a sharp, piercing pain in her chest, not just for her father, but for the house, for the memories, for the entire world they had known, now teetering on the edge of an abyss. Her mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of his words. Blackwood Manor, her home, seized? Sold? It was unthinkable. Where would they go? What would become of Clara, her younger sister, whose innocent laughter was the only true warmth left in these cold halls? Clara, who dreamt of a future filled with bright possibilities, unaware of the storm clouds gathering overhead. Eleanor had always been the stronger one, the practical one, the one who tried to shield her family from the harshest realities. But this felt like an avalanche. Lord Vance slowly lifted his head, his face streaked with tears, his eyes pleading. There is, there is one path, one salvation, my daughter. A difficult one, but it is the only way. He reached for a fresh piece of parchment, its pristine whiteness a stark contrast to the faded documents scattered around him. He pushed it across the desk toward him, his hand still trembling. Eleanor's eyes scanned the elegant script. Her breath caught. The words swam before her eyes, to Duke Alaric Beaumont, an offer of marriage. The name struck her like a physical blow. Duke Alaric Beaumont, the Duke. His reputation preceded him like a cold, impenetrable fog. He was known as the wealthiest, most powerful man in the county, a force of nature cloaked in an aura of cold authority. Whispers followed his name, aloof, formidable, intensely private. He was a man who commanded respect, but never warmth. He had never been known to entertain a potential bride, much less offer a contract. The idea of him, this distant, formidable figure, making such an offer was bewildering, almost frightening. He has offered to clear all our debts, Lord Vance explained, his voice thick with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Every last shilling in exchange for your hand in marriage. He watched her, his gaze desperate, searching for any sign of understanding or acceptance. Eleanor felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Her lungs burned, starved for oxygen. This was not merely a proposal, this was a transaction, a bargain struck for their very survival. Her life, her future offered up as collateral. A wave of dread washed over her, chilling her to the core. Marry Duke Alaric Beaumont, a man she had never truly met, only seen from afar at official events, a man whose piercing gray eyes seemed to strip away all pretense, whose presence commanded silence. She had always imagined her marriage to be one of affection, of companionship, perhaps even love. A quiet, gentle existence, far removed from the cold calculations of society. But those dreams, she realized with a sickening lurch, were luxuries she could no longer afford. She looked at her father, his face a mask of pleading sorrow. He had no other options. He was offering her up as a sacrifice, and he knew it. His pain was palpable, a heavy cloak draped over his already failing frame. "Father," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "are you certain there is no other way?" She wanted to argue, to fight, to demand an alternative, but the words died on her lips. She saw the truth in his eyes, the absolute crushing finality of their situation. He shook his head slowly, tears once more welling in his eyes. "I have exhausted every avenue, Eleanor, every last one. Lord Ashworth will not wait. If we do not accept this offer, by week's end, everything will be lost. Everything." His hand reached across the desk, grasping hers, his touch cold and clammy. "This is our only hope, my dearest. For Blackwood Manor, for Clara, for your mother's legacy." Clara, the name resonated deep within her. Her sweet, innocent sister, whose world would be shattered if they lost everything. Clara, who loved to chase butterflies in the overgrown garden, who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. Eleanor could not bear the thought of Clara facing destitution, her vibrant spirit crushed by poverty. Her younger sister deserved a future, a chance at happiness. And her parents, too, deserved to live out their remaining years with some semblance of peace, not under the shadow of ruin. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat feeling raw and constricted. Her mind, usually so clear, was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Fear, resignation, a profound sense of injustice. But stronger than all of these was her unwavering loyalty, her deep, abiding love for her family. She was a Vance, and Vances faced their duties head-on, no matter the personal cost. Her pride, a quiet and stubborn thing, demanded it. Her compassion, a tender ache in her heart, compelled her to protect those she loved. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, picturing Clara's bright smile, her mother's kind eyes from the locket pressed against her skin. This was her path. Her destiny, perhaps. A grim one, but a necessary one. The weight of generations of Vances seemed to settle on her shoulders, an unspoken command to uphold their name, to protect their fragile existence. When she opened her eyes, her gaze was steady, though a single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "I understand, Father," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, though tinged with a profound sadness. "I will marry Duke Alaric Beaumont." The words were like a death knell echoing in the quiet study, sealing her fate with an undeniable finality. A shiver ran down her spine, not of cold, but of the immense weight of the decision she had just made. A wave of relief, quickly followed by fresh sorrow, washed over Lord Vance's face. He squeezed her hand, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "My brave girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You have saved us all. You are truly your mother's daughter." The compliment felt like a bittersweet balm, acknowledging her sacrifice even as it wounded her. She offered him a small, weak smile, trying to reassure him, to ease the guilt she knew he must be feeling. She stood slowly, her limbs feeling heavy, as if she had just completed an arduous journey. The scent of old books and despair clung to her. She wanted nothing more than to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the study, to be alone with her thoughts, to process the monumental decision that had just been made for her, by her. "If you will excuse me, Father," she murmured, her voice still quiet, distant. He nodded, unable to meet her gaze, consumed by his own mixture of relief and profound regret. She turned and walked out of the study, leaving him amidst his papers and his brandy, the heavy oak door closing softly behind her. The sound was like the final closing of a chapter, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another, entirely unknown. Eleanor made her way back to her chambers, the long corridor feeling even longer, the silence of the house even more profound. Each step she took felt like walking towards a precipice, a future she could not yet see, only feel the cold, terrifying emptiness of. The faded elegance of Blackwood Manor seemed to mock her, its crumbling grandeur reflecting the crumbling of her own dreams. Once inside her room, she closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. The room was cold, the fire in the hearth long dead. The familiar comfort of her own space offered little solace. She walked towards the window, pulling aside the heavy, dusty drapes. The last vestiges of twilight painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. The world outside seemed just as bleak as the world within her. She moved to her small dressing table, its surface scarred and worn, and sat down. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and solemn, her hazel eyes wide with a mixture of shock and quiet despair. She reached for the locket, pulling it from beneath her gown. Her fingers traced the smooth, cool metal, feeling the familiar indentations of the worn engraving. This was her mother's, a symbol of their family, of the love and lineage she was now bound to protect at all costs. A sob escaped her, raw and uncontrolled, then another and another until her shoulders shook with the force of her grief. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast, blurring her vision. She wept for the dreams she was forced to relinquish, for the gentle life she had imagined, for the innocence she would inevitably lose. She wept for her father's pain, for Clara's unawareness, and most of all for herself, for the young woman who had just signed away her future, her heart, her very essence. Her fingers locked around the locket, clenching it tightly in her palm, as if it were the only thing grounding her in this new, terrifying reality. The silver grew warm from her grip, a small, tangible comfort amidst the overwhelming despair. She pictured Duke Alaric Beaumont's stern, unyielding face, the coldness in his gray eyes, the formidable reputation that preceded him. He was a stranger, a powerful, distant figure, and he was now her destiny. The thought sent another wave of shivers through her. She was to be his wife, bound to him by duty and a contract. There would be no love, no tenderness, only a cold, formal existence dictated by his formidable will. The very idea made her soul ache with a profound loneliness. But even as the tears fell, even as her heart threatened to shatter, a quiet resolve began to harden within her. She had made her choice. She had accepted her grim future. She would be the shield for her family, the one who bore the burden, the one who sacrificed everything so that those she loved might endure. She would marry Duke Alaric Beaumont, and she would protect her family, no matter the case to her own heart. The locket pressed against her skin, a constant, heavy reminder of her solemn vow. She wept silently in the cold, dark room, accepting her fate as the only way to safeguard her loved ones. The carriage wheels crunched on the gravel path, a sound that felt like the grinding of bones in Eleanor's very soul. Her mother's locket, cold against her palm, was her only anchor. She stared out the window, watching Blackwood Manor shrink with every turn, its familiar, decaying grandeur a painful farewell. The peeling paint, the overgrown rose bushes, the crooked chimney that always threatened to fall. Each imperfection was a cherished memory, now dissolving into the gray morning mist. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, leaving a cold track on her skin. She had promised herself no more tears, but the heart felt no such obligation. Her sister Clara had been asleep when Eleanor left, nestled in their shared, threadbare bed. Eleanor had pressed a silent kiss to her forehead, a promise whispered to the sleeping girl that she would be safe, that their family would endure. That moment felt like a lifetime ago, swallowed by the vast, empty road ahead. The chill of the morning air seeped through the carriage walls, mirroring the cold dread that settled deep within her. It was not just the departure from home. It was the departure from herself she feared most. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light outside the window and the monotonous rhythm of hooves. The landscape changed from familiar, gentle hills to more rugged, imposing terrain. She knew they were nearing Beaumont territory. With every mile, the air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on her chest. Her throat tightened, a dry knot of anxiety. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the faint scent of old leather and dust inside the carriage. Then, through the window, it appeared. Beaumont Hall. It rose from the earth like a challenge, a formidable fortress of dark gray stone. Its sheer size stole her breath, dwarfing the landscape around it. Eleanor felt a sudden tremor run through her hands, her fingers locking around the locket. Blackwood Manor had been a grand house once, but this was something else entirely, a monument to power and wealth that stretched further than her eye could comprehend. The carriage rolled beneath a massive stone archway, the sound echoing like a drum through the stillness. A meticulously manicured driveway, lined with ancient oaks, stretched before them, leading to the towering main entrance. The air here was cool, carrying a faint, unfamiliar scent of expensive polish and distant, damp earth. Every window, every turret, every intricate carving spoke of generations of unyielding authority. Eleanor felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being utterly insignificant, a tiny moth drawn to a formidable, unyielding flame. The enormous oak doors swung inward, revealing a cavernous hall. Sunlight streamed through high, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like a million tiny secrets. The polished marble floors gleamed, reflecting the light in an almost blinding way. Her boots clicked softly, the sound amplified in the vast silence. It was a silence that felt heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the rustle of a servant's livery as they bowed deeply. There was no warmth here, only an overwhelming sense of cold opulence. It was magnificent, yes, but magnificent in the way a grand mausoleum might be. A stern-faced housekeeper, her expression unreadable, led Eleanor through endless corridors. Tapestries of forgotten battles adorned the walls, their colors muted by time. Suits of armor stood like silent sentinels, their hollow eyes seeming to watch her every step. Each room they passed was immaculate, pristine, yet utterly devoid of the clutter and warmth that made a house a home. Eleanor felt her shoulders slump, a weariness settling deep into her bones. She was not a guest here. She was a possession, carefully transported to her gilded cage. Her allocated chambers were vast, almost overwhelmingly so. A four-poster bed, draped in heavy velvet, stood like a silent monolith in the center of the room. A dressing table, laden with silver brushes and crystal bottles she would never use, gleamed beneath a tall, arched window. The view from that window was breathtaking, rolling hills and distant forests stretching to the horizon, but it felt like a painting, detached and unreachable. She walked to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass. The cold seeped into her fingertips, matching the chill in her heart. She was here now, a prisoner of circumstance, her fate sealed by a signature on a document. Dinner was a grand, formal affair, held in a dining hall large enough to host a small army. Eleanor found herself seated at one end of a long, polished mahogany table, the Duke at the other. The distance between them felt like a chasm, not just of space, but of understanding. She wore one of her few remaining decent gowns, a deep emerald silk that had seen better days, now carefully mended. She felt like a relic, an antique brought out for display. Duke Alaric Beaumont was everything the rumors had described, and yet more. He was tall, powerfully built, with dark, unruly hair that seemed to defy the severe style he likely attempted. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, were piercing, seeming to look right through her, not at her. He possessed an aura of quiet authority, a stillness that commanded respect more effectively than any shouted order. He spoke little, his voice a low rumble when he did, issuing terse instructions to the servants. Every movement was precise, economical, radiating a controlled power that made her feel even smaller, more fragile. She watched him surreptitiously between bites of the exquisitely prepared, yet tasteless food. His profile was sharp, almost hawkish, framed by the flicker of candlelight. There was no warmth in his gaze, no hint of curiosity, only a cool, detached observation. He was studying her, she realized, weighing her, assessing his new acquisition. Her stomach churned, a mixture of fear and a strange, quiet defiance. She was not a prize mare to be judged on her breeding. The meal passed in a strained silence, punctuated only by the clink of silverware and the soft tread of servants. Eleanor felt exposed, vulnerable under his steady, unblinking gaze. She imagined her parents back at Blackwood, anxiously awaiting news, clinging to the hope that this sacrifice would save them. The thought was a bitter pill, hardening her resolve. She would play her part. She would be the Duke's wife, a silent, obedient ornament. But she would not break. Later, excusing herself with a polite but shaky voice, Eleanor retreated to her chambers. The silence there was even more oppressive than the dining hall. She paced the vast room, her silk gown rustling softly, a sound that seemed to mock her solitude. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and old wood, a stark contrast to the damp, earthy smell of Blackwood. She longed for the familiar comfort of her old, cramped room, for the sound of Clara's gentle snoring, for the faint, sweet scent of lavender from her mother's sachets. Here, there was only the echoing emptiness, a chilling reminder of her new reality. She stood by the window again, staring out into the deepening twilight. The gardens, though meticulously kept, seemed to stretch into an endless, dark expanse. The wind sighed through the ancient trees, a mournful whisper that matched the one in her heart. She felt a profound loneliness, a desolate ache that tightened her chest. This magnificent prison offered no comfort, no solace. A distant sound pierced the silence, faint at first, then growing clearer. Laughter, robust, uninhibited male laughter, carried on the cool evening breeze. It was a raw, unrefined sound, completely at odds with the rigid formality of Beaumont Hall. It seemed to come from beyond the main manor, somewhere further down the estate grounds. She listened intently, straining to catch the echoes of mirth. It was a sound of life, of genuine, unburdened joy, a stark contrast to the suffocating quiet around her. Her heart gave a strange, unexpected leap. The laughter pulled at her, a silent, insistent call. It was a reminder that outside these cold stone walls, outside this gilded cage, there was still a world that breathed and felt and lived. An inexplicable curiosity, A longing for something real, something unpolished, took root in her soul. She felt an urgent, almost desperate desire to escape the manor's stifling embrace, to find the source of that joyful sound. It felt like a lifeline, a whisper of freedom in her new, lonely world. The distant, rough laughter pulled Eleanor from Beaumont Hall's oppressive silence. The manor's opulent halls felt far more suffocating than her own family's decaying home. She moved through the corridors, her silk gown rustling against marble, a sound too loud in the stillness. Each step took her closer to the scent of hay and horses, a promise of a different world. She found a side door, usually for servants, and slipped through it. It felt like a quiet rebellion. The afternoon sun, warmer than the air inside, touched her skin. Her eyes adjusted to the brightness, scanning the vast grounds. Lawns stretched towards a cluster of sturdy buildings. The sounds grew clearer, rhythmic hooves, gentle whinnies, shouted commands, and that unburdened laughter. A small, tentative smile touched her lips, a feeling unknown since her arrival. She walked towards the stables, her slippers crunching on gravel. As she neared, the sounds became a symphony of honest labor. Stable hands worked with practiced ease. Brushes hissed, buckets clanked, and the rich, earthy smell of hay filled the air. It was a world away from the manor's beeswax and cool stone. Eleanor paused at the largest stable block, her hand resting on the weathered oak. A nervous flutter stirred within her. She was a lady of refinement, unused to such rough surroundings. One part of her urged retreat, back to her gilded cage. Another, more insistent part pushed her forward. This felt real, alive. She stepped inside, curiosity widening her eyes. Warm light and shadows filled the space. Dust motes danced in sunbeams, illuminating the straw. Horses stood in their stalls, powerful forms turning soft, intelligent eyes toward her. The air was thick with leather and sweet hay, a comforting aroma. She watched a stable hand braid a mare's mane, his movements precise. Another whistled while polishing a bridle. Suddenly a voice boomed, startling her. "What's a lady doing in here? Lost a bauble, perhaps?" Eleanor flinched, her hand flying to her chest. She turned, her cheeks flushing. Leaning against a stall, wiping his hands on a grimy rag, was a man. He was tall, with dark, unruly hair and striking gray eyes that seemed to pierce her composure. His face was smudged with dirt, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms. He wore simple clothes, a disarming, roguish smile on his lips. This was not the kind of man she usually addressed. "I am not lost," Eleanor managed, her voice breathy. A strange heat rose in her face under his direct gaze. He was gruff, like the stable hands, but his rough-hewn features held charm, a spark of life utterly absent from the Duke's cold stare. He pushed off the stall, stepping towards her, his movements loose and confident. His presence filled the space, vibrant and compelling. "Not lost, eh?" he chuckled, his voice a low rumble. "Just admiring the finest beasts in the county. We don't often get such delicate company." He gestured with his chin, his smile widening. Eleanor found herself, against her better judgment, returning a small, hesitant smile. The air around him felt lighter, less constrained than any conversation at Beaumont Hall. Her shyness, usually an insurmountable wall, began to chip away. "I find them quite magnificent," she confessed, her gaze sweeping the horses. One large bay mare with a gentle expression dipped its head. Eleanor felt a surge of warmth. "I have always admired horses, though I have had little opportunity to be around them." She remembered childhood dreams of riding freely, but her family's declining fortunes meant fewer luxuries. The stable boy's gray eyes softened. He watched her, thoughtful, then nodded. "Aye, they are that. More honest than most folk. A horse tells you what it thinks, plain as day." He gestured to the bay mare. "This one's Lady. A bit of a temper if you don't treat her right, but a heart of gold. She's a good judge of character." He winked, and a genuine, unbidden laugh bubbled from Eleanor. It felt foreign, exhilarating. "She seems very calm now," Eleanor observed, stepping closer to the stall. Her fingers twitched, wanting to feel the mare's velvet muzzle. She longed for this simple, tactile connection. The Duke offered only cold glances. This man offered a shared moment of simple appreciation. "That's because she likes you, I reckon," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "She can sense a kind hand, My name's Jack. What might yours be, fair lady of the stables? He extended a large calloused hand, smudged with dirt, but held out with unexpected gentleness. Eleanor hesitated and then placed her smaller hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and utterly real. A jolt, not of fear but recognition, went through her arm. Eleanor, she replied, her voice steady now. Lady Eleanor Vance. The title felt out of place here, in this haven of honest work. Jack's eyebrows raised, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, but his smile remained. Lady Eleanor, then, a pleasure to meet you in my humble domain. He released her hand, the warmth lingered. He leaned back against the stall, arms crossed, his gaze never leaving her face. The intensity of his attention was unnerving, yet compelling. He seemed to truly see her, not just her title. You seem very fond of them, Eleanor remarked, gesturing towards Lady. Do you spend all your time here, Jack? She felt a genuine curiosity about his life. Most of it, Wendy, he replied. They're good company, better than some humans, I'd wager. Always honest, always true. They teach you about patience and earning trust. He pushed off the stall. Would you like to meet them properly? Not all are as gentle as Lady. He offered a crooked smile, mischief in his eyes. A thrill went through Eleanor. Oh, I would very much like that, Jack. Her voice was soft, a whisper, filled with a longing she hadn't known. To touch a horse, to be close to these creatures, felt like a small act of freedom. Jack led her down the stalls, his presence a comforting shield. He introduced her to Storm, a spirited young stallion, and Clover, a placid old draft horse. Eleanor tentatively reached out, stroking soft muzzles, running her hand over powerful necks. The sensation was grounding. Real. She asked simple questions about their habits, their temperaments, their names. Jack answered patiently, his gruff exterior softening with every query. He explained the nuances of their care, his passion clear. Eleanor listened, captivated. She watched his strong, adept hands, admiring the quiet dignity of his labor. This man worked with his hands, understood the earth and its creatures, a stark contrast to the Duke's refined world. You have a way with them, Eleanor observed, watching him speak about a stubborn pony. It's as if you speak their language. Jack chuckled, a warm, resonant sound chasing away her anxiety. They speak their own language, Lady Eleanor. You just have to listen and be patient. Most folk rush, expecting a horse to bend, but a horse, like a good friend, needs to be understood. He met her eyes. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor felt a profound connection, as if he spoke not just of horses, but of human relationships. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, walking from stall to stall. Eleanor shared an anecdote about a small, clumsy pony she rode as a young girl, a memory long buried. Jack listened with surprising attentiveness, his head tilted, a genuine smile replacing his earlier smirk. It was a shared moment of simple humanity, without titles or expectations. The laughter, when it came again, was mutual, light, unforced. Eleanor felt a lightness in her chest, an ease she had not known since before her family's troubles. She could breathe freely here. You're a good listener, Jack, Eleanor said softly, watching him check a horse's hoof. The afternoon light mellowed, casting long shadows. He straightened, brushing hay from his trousers. And you're a good observer, Lady Eleanor. Many folk come through here, but few truly see what's going on. His gaze held hers, a depth in his eyes stirring something within her. It promised understanding, a rarity in her life. Their conversation shifted to mundane topics, the weather, the harvest, stable life. Eleanor found herself talking more openly than ever before, sharing small observations, careful to avoid revealing too much. She felt utterly disarmed by his presence. He spoke of the freedom of open fields, the satisfaction of honest work. Eleanor longed for that unburdened existence. Her own life felt so constrained. As the sun dipped, casting a golden glow, Jack paused by a workbench. He picked up a small piece of wood and a sharp knife. His strong, calloused fingers moved with surprising dexterity. Here, he said, not looking up. A little something for a lady who truly appreciates a good horse. Eleanor watched, mesmerized. The knife carved away slivers of wood, revealing the form of a small, rough-hewn horse. It was simple, without intricate details, but the way he shaped it brought the wood to life. Her heart beat a little faster. No one had ever given her something so personal. This was created just for her, in this moment of unexpected connection. Soon the small horse was complete. Jack blew away the last shavings, then held it out. It fit perfectly into her palm, smooth and warm from his hands. The wood was plain, unvarnished, but its simplicity held a beauty that transcended any jewel. It was a tangible piece of this unexpected warmth, a symbol of the genuine connection that had blossomed in the dusty stables. "It's beautiful, Jack," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her fingers locked around the little horse, a sudden fierce protectiveness rising. She knew if she let go, she would drop it, and with it, this fragile, newfound hope. She looked up at him, her hazel eyes glistening. There was no artifice in her gaze, only profound gratitude. He nodded, a soft smile gracing his lips. "A good horse for a good lady." His eyes met hers. In that shared glance, Eleanor felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Hope for connection, for understanding, for a life that might contain more than duty and cold obligation. As she walked away, the small wooden horse clutched tightly in her hand. She found herself wondering about this gruff, charming stable boy, Jack, and the unexpected way he had touched her lonely heart. The small wooden horse felt cool and smooth in Eleanor's palm. She traced its simple curves, a silent comfort against the silk of her gown. The grand halls of Beaumont Hall, with their polished marble and hushed echoes, offered no such solace. Her days were a tapestry of forced courtesies and looming dread, each thread pulling tighter around her. But in the quiet hours after the household settled, her thoughts inevitably drifted to the stables, to the scent of hay and horseflesh, to the easy laughter that somehow breached the manor's formidable walls. Eleanor found herself drawn back again and again to that unexpected haven. Her first return was cautious, a tentative exploration of the sun-drenched courtyard. The memory of the carved horse, still tucked safely in her pocket, lent her a peculiar courage. She told herself she simply sought a breath of fresh air, a moment away from the suffocating grandeur of the Duke's residence. Yet, her steps carried her purposefully toward the main stable doors, where the rich aroma of straw and leather promised a different kind of world. Jack was there, as always, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of grease on his cheek. He was mending a bridle, his strong hands surprisingly deft. He glanced up as she entered, a slow smile spreading across his face. Not the practiced, polite smile of a courtier, but one of genuine, unburdened warmth. Her heart gave a small, traitorous flutter. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a sensation she had not known in years. He nodded, a familiar, easy gesture. "Back again, Lady Eleanor. Thought you might be tired of our dusty corners." "Dusty corners hold more charm than polished halls sometimes," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. She moved closer, careful not to disturb his work, but drawn by the quiet industry of the place. The sound of hooves stamping lightly in the stalls, the soft whicker of a mare, the distant call of a stable hand, all combined to create a soothing symphony, a stark contrast to the stifling silence of the manor. They talked at first about the horses. He patiently explained the temperament of each animal, the nuances of their training, the subtle language of their ears and tails. Eleanor listened intently, her hazel eyes bright with genuine interest. She felt a lightness in her chest, a freedom to simply be that was utterly alien to her life within the manor walls. This man, Jack, treated her not as a noble lady betrothed to a duke, but simply as a curious, attentive woman. One afternoon, he showed her a young foal, still wobbly on its long legs, its coat impossibly soft. Eleanor reached out a tentative hand, stroking its velvety muzzle. The foal nuzzled into her touch, and a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over her. She laughed, a sound that felt entirely new, entirely her own, and Jack's smile mirrored her delight. The sunlight streamed through the high, stable windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, making the scene feel like a painting, suspended in time. Their conversations soon drifted beyond horses. They spoke of the changing seasons, the wildflowers blooming in the meadows, the taste of ripe berries in summer. Jack recounted tales of local festivals, of simple country folk, of the unyielding demands of the land. He spoke with an earthy wisdom that captivated Eleanor. He seemed to see the world with a clarity she had long forgotten, a world where worth was measured not by lineage or wealth, but by honesty and hard work. She found herself sharing anecdotes of her childhood, of simpler times at Blackwood Manor before its decline, revealing vulnerabilities she would never dare show to anyone else. The quiet understanding in his gray eyes was a balm to her weary soul. Each visit became a precious, stolen hour. Eleanor would find excuses to slip away from her formal duties, sometimes under the guise of sketching, sometimes claiming a need for fresh air. She felt a thrill of rebellion with every secret excursion, a delicious defiance against the fate that awaited her. She knew deep down that these moments were dangerous, that nurturing such an easy intimacy with a stable hand was unthinkable for a lady of her standing, especially one destined to become a duchess. Yet, she could not stop herself. His hands, though calloused from work, held a gentle strength when he helped her mount a horse. Their fingers brushed once, accidentally, as he adjusted a stirrup, and a jolt, sharp and unexpected, traveled through Eleanor's arm, sending a flush to her cheeks. She quickly pulled her hand away, pretending to adjust her skirt, her heart hammering against her ribs. She glanced at him, but his expression was unreadable, his focus seemingly on the horse. Did he feel it too? Or was it merely her imagination, fueled by a longing she dared not name? The wooden horse, her small, rough-hewn gift, became her talisman. She would often hold it, feeling its weight, remembering the kindness in his eyes. It was a stark contrast to the magnificent jewels and silks that were now laid out for her, symbols of her impending marriage. Those gifts felt cold, impersonal, almost suffocating. Jack's small carving, however, thrummed with a quiet warmth, a silent testament to a connection that felt genuine, real. Eleanor found herself comparing him to the Duke. The Duke, whom she had only seen across a vast dining table, was an imposing, almost chilling figure. His presence commanded respect, but offered no comfort. Jack, on the other hand, offered an unspoken reassurance, a grounded presence that steadied her tumultuous emotions. He never spoke of grand titles or societal expectations. He simply listened, his gaze direct and honest, making her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. One rainy afternoon, they sat beneath a small awning, watching the rain sheet down outside. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the damp scent of earth and wet straw. Jack had been teaching her to tie a complex knot used for leading difficult horses. His fingers, strong and tan, moved with practiced ease. Her own, more delicate, fumbled with the thick rope. He gently guided her hands, his touch light but firm. The warmth of his skin against hers sent another wave of shivers through her. She felt her breath catch in her throat, a strange mixture of apprehension and yearning. "You have nimble fingers, Lady Eleanor," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "You'll master it in no time." She looked up, her gaze meeting his. His gray eyes, usually full of mirth or focused concentration, held a softness, a depth that startled her. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the unspoken words hanging heavy between them, thicker than the humid air. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a desperate drum against the wall of her duty. She felt a powerful, undeniable pull towards him, a yearning for something she knew she could never have. It was a forbidden affection, a dangerous spark in the tinderbox of her arranged life. She averted her gaze, her cheeks burning, and focused on the knot. "It is more complex than it appears," she managed, her voice a little breathy. The thought that she was falling, slowly and irrevocably, for a stable boy filled her with both exhilaration and profound despair. It was a betrayal of her family, of her sacrifice, of everything she was supposed to be. Yet in his presence, those weighty obligations seemed to diminish, replaced by a simple, profound happiness she had not known was possible. She spent longer and longer hours in the stables, sometimes helping with small tasks, sometimes simply watching him work. She saw him interact with the other stable hands, always fair, always respected. He possessed an innate authority, a natural leadership that surprised her. It was incongruous with his humble station, a detail that occasionally snagged at the edges of her awareness, but she quickly dismissed it. Perhaps it was simply his strength of character, she reasoned, a quality that shone through regardless of station. He taught her the names of the constellations overhead during one late evening visit, their voices hushed beneath a canopy of stars. The chill night air bit at her skin, but the warmth of their shared moment, the intimacy of his quiet explanations, kept her feeling strangely comforted. He spoke of ancient myths and simple country wisdom, connecting the distant stars to the earth below. She felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of belonging that she rarely experienced within the formal confines of the manor. As the days turned into weeks, Eleanor's dependence on these stolen moments grew. They were her lifeline, her only source of genuine human connection in a world otherwise dictated by obligation and expectation. The very thought of leaving the stables, of returning to the cold reality of her future as Duchess of Beaumont, sent a shiver of dread through her. How could she possibly endure a life devoid of this simple, profound honesty? How could she marry a man she did not know, when her heart now held a secret, forbidden tenderness for another? She often found herself wishing, fervently, that things were different, that she was simply Eleanor, and he was simply Jack, and that their paths could intertwine without the crushing weight of their respective worlds. She longed for a life where love was chosen, not dictated, where her heart could guide her steps. The idea of being Alaric's wife felt like a gilded prison, while the rough, honest work of the stables, with Jack by her side, felt like true freedom. One brisk morning, as Eleanor walked towards the stables, a familiar spring in her step, she heard voices from the back courtyard. Two maids were gossiping near the laundry lines, their voices sharp in the crisp air. Eleanor paused, hidden behind a hedge, not intending to eavesdrop, but unable to move. "They say the Duke is returning within the week," one maid whispered, her voice laced with excitement. "For all the pre-wedding fuss." "Indeed," the other replied, a sigh in her tone. "It will be nothing but formal dinners and tiresome fittings. And then, Lady Eleanor will be Duchess. Imagine." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, a sudden icy grip on her chest. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. The Duke, his return, pre-wedding formalities. It was a jarring reminder, a cruel intrusion of her grim reality into the sanctuary she had so carefully constructed. Her blood ran cold. All the warmth, the lightness, the stolen joy she had found with Jack shattered into 1,000 pieces. The chasm between her two worlds, the one of duty and the one of forbidden affection, yawned wide before her, threatening to swallow her whole. A low, grinding sound, deep and persistent, carried through the thick walls. It was the heavy carriage wheels, turning slowly on the gravel drive, announcing an arrival no one could ignore. Eleanor stood perfectly still by a tall window, its glass pane a sheet of cold against her fingertips. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild bird trapped within its cage. She watched as the sleek black horses, magnificent and powerful, drew closer. Their breath plumed white in the crisp, late afternoon air, like ethereal flags in the cold. A sharp intake of breath caught in her throat, a small, desperate sound in the quiet room. This was the moment. He had arrived. A liveried footman, quick and deferential, rushed forward. He struggled briefly with the heavy carriage door, pulling it open with a soft, resonant thud. Out stepped a man cloaked in dark, heavy wool. He was tall, his silhouette imposing against the pale winter sky. His frame was undeniably broad, a solid block of presence. Each movement he made was precise, economical, without a wasted gesture. The rumors she had heard, whispers of his cold, unyielding authority, suddenly solidified into something very real, something palpable. Eleanor had only ever glimpsed him from afar, a distant figure across a ballroom or on horseback. Now, this close, even separated by the thick pane of glass, his presence felt like a physical weight pressing against her, stealing the air from the room. His head turned then, slowly, deliberately. For a fleeting instant, his gaze seemed to sweep across the very window where she stood. She instinctively stepped back, a small, involuntary movement, as if to shield herself from an unseen force. A blush, hot and unwelcome, crept up her neck, staining her cheeks. Her fingers locked around the cold stone of the window frame, gripping it with unexpected force. She knew if she let go of its solid support, her hands might begin to tremble uncontrollably. Later that evening, the grand drawing room of Beaumont Hall felt strangely smaller, colder, constricted under his absolute dominion. Duke Alaric Beaumont stood by the imposing stone fireplace, radiating an almost palpable chill that filled the vast space. He was impeccably dressed, every line of his dark suit tailored to perfection, a testament to silent power. His dark, unruly hair, which she had noted from a distance, seemed to add to his formidable aura, a wildness contained by rigid control. His gray eyes, sharp and piercing, surveyed the room with an unnerving intensity. They seemed to miss nothing, absorbing every detail, every nuance, every person present. He was nothing like the easygoing, laughing Jack of the stables. This Duke was a fortress of ice and polished stone, an impenetrable barrier. Lady Eleanor was formally presented to him by the stern, gray-haired housekeeper, Mrs. Davies. Her name, Eleanor Vance, felt thin and fragile, almost insignificant, as it left the housekeeper's prim lips. She curtsied deeply, her gaze fixed stubbornly on the intricate floral pattern of the Persian carpet. Her hands, clasped tightly together, were suddenly ice cold, numb with a mixture of fear and dread. The heavy silk of her gown felt stiff, suffocating. When she finally dared to lift her eyes, a slow, hesitant movement, she met his. They were indeed gray, like a winter storm sky, vast and full of unspoken depths, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch painfully in her chest. There was no warmth in them, no flicker of recognition, no hint of a welcoming smile. Instead, she met a cool, assessing gaze that seemed to strip away her composure, laying bare every hidden anxiety. He inclined his head slightly, a minimal gesture that held both politeness and undeniable distance. Lady Eleanor, his voice was deep, resonant, and formal. It carried the unyielding authority of someone completely accustomed to being instantly obeyed, a sound that brooked no argument. "Welcome to Beaumont Hall." His words, though perfectly polite, offered no comfort at all. They felt like a pronouncement, a definitive statement of her new reality. Eleanor managed a reply, her own voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor she felt begin in her hands, spreading subtly through her arms. "Thank you, Your Grace. It is an honor to be here." The lie tasted bitter, acrid on her tongue, clinging to her throat. Honor was the last thing she felt. She felt like a pawn in a game she did not understand, a sacrifice made for others. The hours that followed were a series of stilted, uncomfortable conversations. The Duke spoke of estate matters, of the local gentry, of the weather's unpredictable turns. His questions were direct, his answers concise, offering no room for further exploration. Eleanor found herself searching desperately for anything personal, any hint of the man beneath the imposing title. But there was only the impenetrable Duke, the unyielding facade. She responded with polite generalities, her mind a whirling storm of anxieties, each thought colliding with the next. Every word she uttered felt measured, every smile strained, a performance she was ill-equipped to give. A vast emotional chasm yawned between them, wide and seemingly unbridgeable. It was a gulf she felt, with a crushing certainty she could never cross. Her thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the stables, to the comforting scent of hay and honest sweat. She remembered Jack's easy laughter, the genuine interest that lit his eyes as she spoke about her family's old mare, her voice soft with affection. He had listened, truly listened, absorbing her words. This Duke merely observed, his gaze dissecting, evaluating. She found herself stealing glances at him throughout the evening, unable to resist the pull of his presence. He stood tall, often silent, yet his quiet dominance filled the room, making all other conversations seem trivial. And each time her eyes flickered towards him, she found his gaze already upon her. Those piercing gray eyes followed her, lingered on her, then moved away, only to return moments later, a silent, relentless watch. It was profoundly disconcerting, a constant pressure. It made her profoundly uneasy, this constant scrutiny, this unwavering attention. Was he judging her, weighing her worth? Was he finding her wanting, already regretting the arrangement that bound them. A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach, twisting painfully. Yet, beneath the unease, a strange, persistent curiosity began to stir within her, a faint ember in the cold. What did he see when he looked at her? What was he thinking behind those unreadable eyes? It was a curiosity she found herself fighting, for to be curious about him felt like a betrayal of her own heart, a surrender she was not ready to make. He said little, his words few and precise, yet his silence was more powerful than any speech, an eloquent expression of his solitude. She watched him interact with the few other guests, his formality unwavering, a barrier that kept everyone at a distance. He seemed to hold the world at arm's length, allowing no one close. She remembered Jack reaching out to steady a frisky colt, his large hands gentle yet firm, his touch reassuring. The sharp contrast was a painful ache in her chest, a profound sense of loss. She felt the cool, smooth weight of the locket beneath her gown, pressed against her skin. It was a cold comfort, a tangible reminder of the family she was saving, the sacrifice she was making. It was for them, she repeated to herself, a silent, desperate mantra, for Clara, for her parents, for their future. This cold, imposing man was her future, a future she had chosen out of duty, not out of any desire. The thought settled heavily in her soul, like a stone dropped into still water, sinking to the very bottom. The evening eventually led to a formal dinner. The vast dining hall of Beaumont Hall was illuminated by 1,000 candles, their tiny flames dancing in the polished silver and glimmering crystal. The long mahogany table gleamed, stretched out like an endless, dark expanse. Eleanor was seated far from the Duke, at the opposite end of the table, a distance that felt profoundly symbolic of their current separation. The chatter of the few other guests was hushed, almost reverent, as if even their voices were subdued by the Duke's pervasive presence. She picked at her food, moving the rich, unfamiliar flavors around her plate, finding them tasteless on her tongue. The silence between courses felt interminable, stretching out endlessly, punctuated only by the delicate clink of silverware against china and the soft rustle of servants moving quietly through the room. She felt trapped, encased in a shell of rigid propriety, unable to breathe freely. Her gaze drifted aimlessly down the table, past the flickering candlelight, past the other stern, unsmiling faces. Her eyes met his. Across the vast table, through the shimmering, shifting light of the candles, Duke Alaric's piercing gray eyes locked onto hers. The bustling world seemed to shrink instantly, dissolving into nothing but that single point of intense contact. There was an intensity in his gaze that stole her breath, leaving her lungs hollow. It held no smile, no overt emotion, yet it was profound, reaching deep within her. It felt as if he saw straight into her, past the polite facade she had carefully constructed, into the very core of her being, her most hidden vulnerabilities. An inexplicable shiver traced its way down her spine, raising goosebumps on her arms, a physical response she could not control. It was not entirely fear, nor was it any sense of warmth. It was a sensation she could not decipher, a jolt of something primal and unsettling, a recognition. Her heart gave a sudden hard thump against her ribs, a violent beat that echoed in her ears. The eye contact held for a beat too long, an eternity in that moment. Then he looked away, his expression once again unreadable. Eleanor felt profoundly unsettled, her mind reeling, unable to comprehend the silent, potent message in his eyes. The vast dining hall of Beaumont Hall still held the lingering scent of polished wood and an oppressive silence. Eleanor had returned to her chambers feeling a peculiar chill, one that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. The Duke's gaze, those piercing gray eyes, had followed her throughout the evening meal, a silent, unsettling presence she could not shake. She had tried to dismiss it as the natural scrutiny of a man assessing his future bride, but a strange shiver had traced its way down her spine, a sensation she could not quite decipher. Her fingers locked around the teacup on her bedside table. She knew if she let go, she would spill it. She paced the thick Persian rug, its intricate patterns blurring beneath her anxious steps. The silence of her lavish room felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating her with its formality. Every gilded frame, every velvet drape, spoke of a world utterly separate from her own, a world where she was merely a pawn in a grand, cold game. She ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of her mother's locket, its familiar weight a small comfort against the rising tide of panic. The image of Clara's bright, innocent face flashed in her mind, a vivid reminder of the immense sacrifice she was making. Sleep offered no refuge. Her dreams were a chaotic tapestry of dark, imposing figures and the cloying scent of beeswax, always culminating in the Duke's unreadable gaze. She awoke with a gasp, the first rays of dawn barely painting the sky, her heart thrumming against her ribs like a trapped bird. The thought of facing another day within the stifling confines of the main house, another stilted conversation, another piercing look from the Duke, was unbearable. She yearned for a place where breath came easier, where the air was not thick with expectation and duty. An insistent whisper in her mind pulled her toward the stables, a place of honest labor and simpler truths. It was a secret world she had discovered, a vibrant counterpoint to the manor's solemn grandeur. She dressed quickly in one of her oldest gowns, a faded blue that blended with the morning shadows, and slipped silently down the grand staircase. The cold marble felt alien beneath her thin slippers, but the promise of the stables, of a moment of genuine human connection, urged her onward. She felt a desperate need to unburden her heart, to speak of the fears that choked her, even if only to the earthy scent of hay and horses. The stable yard was already alive with the sounds of hooves shuffling and the clatter of buckets. A strong, earthy smell of straw, leather, and horseflesh filled her lungs, a welcome change from the refined scents of the manor. It was a place where she felt she could breathe again, where her carefully constructed composure could momentarily falter. Then she saw him. Jack was leading a magnificent bay stallion, his movements fluid and strong, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he spoke softly to the animal. A wave of unexpected relief washed over her, a warmth spreading through her chest despite the morning chill. He glanced up, his eyes meeting hers, and a wide, genuine smile broke across his face. It was a smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, a stark contrast to the polite, distant smiles she received inside the house. "Lady Eleanor," he called out, his voice a low rumble, instantly familiar and comforting. "Early riser today, are we?" His tone was laced with that easy humor she had come to cherish, a lightness that cut through the oppressive weight of her own thoughts. Eleanor offered a weak smile in return, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "Indeed, Jack. The air in here, it feels different, lighter." She walked towards him, her steps growing firmer with each stride, leaving behind the suffocating atmosphere of her reality. The bay horse, sensing her approach, gave a soft snort, its dark eyes intelligent and curious, its warm breath plumed in the cool air. Jack nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Aye, it does. No doubt about it." He paused, his expression shifting subtly, a hint of concern entering his eyes. "You seem troubled, my lady. Is everything well?" His directness, so unlike the veiled inquiries of the manor staff, was both disarming and profoundly welcome. She found herself longing to simply confess everything. A lump formed in Eleanor's throat. She wanted to tell him everything, the crushing weight of her family's debt, the cold bargain, the Duke's imposing presence. But she could not. She could not speak of the man she was bound to marry, the man who held her family's fate in his hands, to a stable boy. The words felt like lead on her tongue, heavy with betrayal. Yet the need to confide was overwhelming, a desperate plea for understanding. "It is the future, Jack," she began, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze fixed on the horse's twitching ear. The smell of fresh hay and saddle leather filled her senses, grounding her slightly. "The future looms large, and it feels very cold." She gripped her hands together, her knuckles white. "I am to be married soon, you know, to Duke Alaric." She forced herself to speak his name, the sound of it feeling alien and heavy in the warm, earthy air of the stable. Jack stood silently, his large hand gently stroking the horse's mane. His eyes, though still kind, seemed to hold a flicker of something she could not quite place, a deep knowing that seemed out of character for a stable hand. "Aye, I have heard the whispers," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. He is a powerful man, the Duke, and a wealthy one, they say. His words were carefully neutral, yet she sensed a deeper meaning beneath them. Eleanor nodded, a fresh wave of dread washing over her. Indeed, powerful and formidable. She finally looked at him, her hazel eyes pleading for an understanding she could not articulate. He is a stranger to me, Jack. A complete stranger. And to think of spending a lifetime with someone so unknown, someone so distant. A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. I feel like a bird in a gilded cage, Jack. A very beautiful, very cold cage. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, a relief to finally speak them aloud. He did not interrupt, simply listened, his gaze steady and empathetic. The sound of a blacksmith's hammer from a distant corner of the stable yard echoed faintly. A stable hand walked by, carrying a pitchfork, and offered a polite nod before continuing his work. Jack waited until they were alone again, the quiet hum of the stable, a comforting backdrop to her confession. Life with a man like the Duke, Eleanor continued, her voice thick with emotion. It would be a life of duty, of expectation, of a constant, profound silence. I imagine his hall so grand, yet so empty of true warmth. She envisioned the Duke's stern face, his unsmiling lips, and felt a profound loneliness settle in her bones. I fear losing myself, Jack, losing the small part of me that still dreams of genuine connection, of laughter that is not forced, of a hand held not out of obligation, but out of true affection. Jack finally moved, stepping closer to her, his shadow falling gently over her. The faint scent of horse and honest labor clung to him, a comforting, earthy aroma. Lady Eleanor, he said, his voice softer now, almost a murmur. Sometimes the grandest exteriors hide the deepest secrets, and sometimes the coldest eyes conceal a yearning that matches your own. His words were cryptic, yet they resonated with an unexpected depth. She found herself searching his gaze for answers, for any hint of what he truly meant. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently wiping away the tear on her cheek. The brief touch sent a jolt through her, a spark of unexpected warmth that ignited a flush in her cheeks. She quickly stepped back, her heart suddenly beating a frantic rhythm. She felt a strange guilt, a forbidden thrill at his touch, even as her mind screamed at her for her impropriety. "Forgive me, my lady," he murmured, his hand quickly retreating, though his eyes still held hers, a profound understanding in their depths. It was not my place. But the moment had passed, leaving a charged silence in its wake. Eleanor cleared her throat, her cheeks still burning. No, no, it is I who should apologize, Jack, for burdening you with my troubles." She felt a renewed wave of shame, not just for her outburst, but for the confusing tremor that had shot through her at his touch. "Never a burden, my lady," he said, his voice firm, restoring a sense of normalcy. He turned his attention back to the bay horse. "Perhaps a ride would clear your head. The air is crisp today, and a good gallop often puts things into perspective." He picked up a saddle from a nearby rack, its leather creaking softly as he lifted it. "This one, Eclipse, is a fine mare, gentle but with spirit." Eleanor, grateful for the change of subject, nodded eagerly. "That would be wonderful, Jack, truly." The thought of feeling the wind in her hair, of the powerful rhythm of a horse beneath her, was a tempting escape. He began to meticulously prepare the saddle, his movements precise and practiced. Eleanor watched him, mesmerized by the ease with which he handled the heavy leather, the way he spoke to the mare in soft, reassuring tones. She had often watched the stable hands, but Jack had a particular grace, a quiet authority that set him apart. "Here, let me show you how to properly adjust the stirrups," he offered, his voice a low invitation. He beckoned her closer to the horse's side. Eleanor stepped forward, her heart still fluttering from their earlier exchange but drawn by his kindness. The mare, Eclipse, nudged her gently with her nose, seeking affection. Jack demonstrated, his fingers deftly working the leather straps. "You want them long enough so your knee has a slight bend, but not so long that your heel drops too far," he explained, his voice patient. "It is all about balance, you see, finding your center." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for a fleeting moment, she felt as though he was speaking of more than just stirrups. He was speaking of her life, of finding her own balance amidst the chaos. Then, as he reached for a buckle that was just out of her easy reach, her hand instinctively moved to assist, guiding his fingers toward the stubborn leather. Their hands brushed. It was a fleeting, innocent contact, yet it felt like a bolt of lightning had shot through her arm, directly into her heart. Her breath hitched. His skin was warm, roughened by work, and surprisingly gentle. A dizzying sensation swept over her, a sudden, undeniable spark that defied all reason and propriety. Jack froze for a fraction of a second, his gaze locking onto hers. In his eyes, she saw a flicker of something raw and intense, a mirroring of the profound shock that coursed through her own veins. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken electricity. The world outside, the bustling stable, the morning light, all faded into a blur. There was only the warmth of his hand against hers, the sudden, sharp intake of her breath, and the deafening thrum of her own pulse. She pulled her hand away as if burned, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson. The warmth of his touch lingered, an embarrassing, exquisite sensation. She averted her gaze, her mind reeling, her thoughts a tangled mess. How could such a simple touch from a stable boy evoke such a powerful, visceral reaction within her? It was illogical, inappropriate, utterly forbidden. "Thank you," she mumbled, her voice strained, barely above a whisper. She focused intensely on the horse's mane, avoiding his eyes, acutely aware of his proximity. The scent of hay suddenly seemed overwhelming, intoxicating. Jack cleared his throat, a low sound that seemed to vibrate through the stable air. "Of course, my lady," he said, his voice now carefully neutral, though she could detect a subtle tremor in his tone. He finished adjusting the stirrup, his movements a little less fluid than before. Eleanor felt a wave of profound confusion wash over her. Here she was, engaged to Duke Alaric Beaumont, a powerful, wealthy man whose piercing gaze still made her shiver. Yet, it was the rough, kind touch of a stable boy, a man utterly beneath her station, that sent a jolt through her very soul. Her heart pounded with a mixture of guilt and a thrilling, terrifying attraction. She was a lady, bound by duty and expectation, yet her heart now yearned for a feeling she had no right to possess, for a man she could never have. The forbidden nature of her feelings for Jack now burned brightly, a dangerous, bewildering flame within her. The soft silk of her wedding gown felt like a shroud. It was not the crisp, comforting linen she usually preferred, nor the sturdy wool of her family's dwindling wardrobe. This was a heavy, shimmering material, rich with lace and intricate embroidery, stitched by nimble fingers that did not know the cost of the threads. She stood still, her arms outstretched, while two seamstresses pricked and pinned, their hushed whispers a constant hum around her. Each tiny adjustment pulled tighter at her spirit. Not just the fabric. The fittings had begun with an almost frantic energy, a whirlwind of activity that swept through Beaumont Hall. Bolts of fabric arrived, shimmering in every color but mostly white, bone, and cream. Dressmakers descended, their measuring tapes and thimbles a prelude to her inevitable fate. Each social call, each presentation to distant relatives of the Duke, felt like another link in the chain tightening around her heart. There was no escape, no reprieve from the relentless march towards the altar. Eleanor's mind, however, stubbornly refused to remain tethered to the present. While Lady Finch prattled about floral arrangements and Mrs. Davies debated the merits of satin versus brocade, Eleanor's thoughts drifted. They always returned to the stables, to the scent of hay and horseflesh, to the easy laughter that felt so real. She yearned for the rough touch of Jack's hand, the uncomplicated honesty in his eyes, a stark contrast to the veiled glances and polite artifice of the drawing rooms. She knew her duty. It was a heavy cloak she had worn since her father's tearful confession, since the first desperate agreement to this marriage. Her family's very survival rested upon her shoulders, a burden she accepted without question. Yet a new treacherous current now ran beneath her resolve. It was a dangerous, tender feeling, born in the warmth of the stables, nurtured by shared silences and whispered words. It was a feeling for Jack, the stable boy. How could she reconcile these two worlds? How could she stand at the altar, pledging her life to a man whose very presence chilled her, when her heart now beat for another? It was a betrayal, she knew, not just of her future husband, but of her own family, of the sacrifice she was making. Her chest ached with the silent conflict, a war waged deep within her, unseen by the bustling servants or the gossiping ladies. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling fitting for a reception gown, Eleanor caught a glimpse of Jack outside. He was leading a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming in the sunlight, its powerful legs moving with fluid grace. Her heart skipped, a familiar, unwelcome flutter. He looked up, perhaps sensing her gaze, and their eyes met through the open window. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, warming her to her core. It was a moment stolen, fleeting, yet it felt more real than all the shimmering fabric and polite conversation combined. Just then, a young maid named Sarah adjusted the hem of Eleanor's gown. Sarah was a cheerful girl, prone to easy chatter, and often shared snippets of the day's happenings. She followed Eleanor's gaze to the stables. "Oh, there's Jack," Sarah said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "He certainly is handsome, isn't he? Not like the others." Eleanor tried to compose herself, her cheeks feeling warm. "He is very good with horses," she managed, her voice softer than she intended. Sarah giggled, smoothing the fabric. "Oh, more than that, my lady. He speaks so proper, not like the other stable lads at all. And his hands," she continued, looking down at Eleanor's own delicate fingers. "They are rough from work, yes, but he holds himself so straight, and he has a way of looking at you as if he knows all your secrets, doesn't he?" A chill, not from the open window, traced its way down Eleanor's spine. Sarah's words, intended as a light observation, landed with the weight of a stone. Proper speech, a straight posture, a knowing gaze. These were not the common traits of a stable boy. Jack had always seemed different, yes, but Eleanor had attributed it to his kind nature, his quiet intelligence. Now a tiny, insistent voice began to whisper in the corners of her mind, a seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of her confusion. She dismissed it at first. Sarah was young, perhaps overly romantic, but the words lingered, echoing in the silent corridors of her thoughts. She remembered the way Jack had explained the intricate lineage of a particular mare, his knowledge surprisingly extensive. She recalled his steady, unwavering gaze when she spoke of her fears, a gaze that seemed to penetrate deeper than simple sympathy. Later that day, during a formal tea with the Duke's aunt, Lady Margaret, Eleanor found herself staring at the fine china teacup in her hand. The conversation swirled around her, a meaningless drone of social niceties and wedding plans. Her own voice felt hollow, forced. Her mind kept replaying Sarah's words. Proper speech, a straight posture. She thought of the Duke, Alaric Beaumont. His speech was always precise, his posture impeccably straight, his eyes piercing. He carried himself with an innate authority, a man born to command. But Jack was different. He was warm, approachable, his clothes often smeared with mud and straw. Yet there were moments when his eyes, so often crinkled with good humor, would turn serious, almost profound. Moments when a certain command entered his tone, even when speaking to the horses. The next morning, Eleanor found herself drawn to the stables again, not for solace this time, but for something else entirely. A subtle shift had occurred in her perception. The warmth she felt for Jack was now tinged with a faint, unsettling unease. She watched him from a slight distance as he oversaw the grooming of a chestnut mare. He spoke to another stable hand, instructing him on the correct way to hold the brush. His voice, though lowered, carried an undeniable authority, a tone that brooked no argument. It was not harsh, but firm, confident. His hands, she noticed, despite their calluses, moved with a certain deliberate grace. They were strong, capable hands, not just for rough labor. She saw him stoop to pick up a fallen bridle, his movement fluid, not clumsy. He then turned, catching her eye, and offered his usual disarming smile. The smile was the same, the warmth genuine, yet something felt subtly altered to Eleanor. The easy familiarity that had once been a comfort now felt almost practiced. A fleeting image of the Duke at the formal dinner, His piercing gray eyes meeting hers across the vast table flashed through her mind. She had felt a strange shiver then, an inexplicable connection that she could not decipher. Was it possible? Could such a cold, imposing man possess such warmth, such kindness? The thought was absurd, impossible. Yet the seed of doubt, once planted, began to sprout tiny, persistent tendrils. She watched him help a young stable boy with a stubborn saddle, his patience boundless, his instructions clear and concise. He corrected the boy's grip, demonstrating with a quiet efficiency that spoke of deep understanding. This was more than just a stable hand's knowledge. This was the quiet assurance of someone who knew how things should be done, someone accustomed to being obeyed. The inconsistencies, once dismissed as quirks of his personality, now began to gather weight. His occasional use of words that felt too formal for a stable, his easy confidence in any situation, the way his gaze seemed to penetrate beyond the surface. Eleanor found herself scrutinizing every gesture, every word, searching for answers, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The man she knew as Jack was beginning to feel like a finely constructed puzzle, and she, unknowingly, had just found the first misplaced piece. A faint scent of horse and hay clung to Eleanor's worn gown, a familiar comfort in the vast echoing halls of Beaumont. She walked with a delicate balance, her mind still replaying the maid's careless words. Refined speech, unusual manners. The phrase had lodged itself like a burr beneath her saddle, irritating and impossible to dislodge. She had tried to dismiss it, to tell herself it was simply the gossip of idle servants, but the seed of doubt had taken root. Now, every interaction with Jack felt tinged with a new, unsettling light. The next morning, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the stables, a place that had become her only refuge from the oppressive weight of her engagement. She watched Jack from a distance as he moved among the horses, his movements fluid and strong. He was speaking to an older stable hand, a man named Thomas, whose face was usually creased with quiet resignation. Today, Thomas listened with an unusual deference. "The south pasture fence needs repair before the week is out, Thomas," Jack said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "And mind the new fillies, they bruise easily." Eleanor paused, her hand hovering over a bucket of oats. Jack spoke not with the suggestion of an employee, but with the quiet authority of an owner, a man whose word was law. Thomas simply nodded, his eyes fixed on Jack, then hurried off to gather tools. It was a small thing, yet it struck Eleanor as profoundly out of place. A stable boy, even a head stable boy, usually requested or suggested, rarely commanded with such innate certainty. She had always attributed his easy confidence to his natural charm, but this felt different. This was a deeper, more ingrained authority. Later, she watched him supervise the mucking out of stalls. He didn't just point or instruct. He explained the efficiency of certain techniques, the importance of proper ventilation, the signs of a horse's good health. His knowledge was encyclopedic, extending far beyond the practicalities of daily stable work. He spoke of feed ratios, breeding lines, and even the economics of horse trading, subjects that belonged more to the master of an estate than to its servant. The other stable hands listened, not just because he was their superior in that moment, but because he clearly knew more than they did. Eleanor saw their respect, a respect born of genuine expertise, not just hierarchy. Her heart began a slow, insistent thrum against her ribs. She remembered the formal dinner in the grand hall, the Duke's piercing gray eyes meeting hers across the vast table. There was a directness in those eyes, an unblinking intensity that had unnerved her. She had felt scrutinized, assessed, yet also recognized. A strange, inexplicable familiarity had flickered between them, a connection she could not name, a feeling that went beyond a simple glance. She had dismissed it then as a trick of the light, or perhaps the overwhelming stress of the situation. Now, a cold dread began to seep into her bones. One afternoon, Jack was showing her a new foal, its spindly legs still unsteady beneath its soft, clumsy body. Eleanor reached out a hand, stroking the velvet muzzle. The foal blinked at her, its eyes wide and curious. "He will be a strong one," Jack said, his voice soft as he watched her with a smile that reached his eyes. "Already has the spirit of his dam." Eleanor looked up at him, and for a fleeting moment, she saw not the smudged face of a stable boy, but a flicker of the same unyielding gaze that had held her captive across the Duke's dining table. The smile softened it, yes, but the intensity remained, a depth of observation that felt unnervingly familiar. A sudden chill traced its way down her spine despite the warmth of the stable air. She averted her gaze, her fingers locking around the foal's mane, needing something solid to anchor her. The wedding preparations continued relentlessly, a flurry of fabric and fittings that pulled Eleanor further into the world she was trying to escape. Her gowns were delivered, heavy silks and fine laces, each stitch a reminder of her impending fate. The cold opulence of Beaumont Hall seemed to mock the simplicity she craved, the genuine connection she had found only in the stables. She spent every spare moment there, not just for the solace, but now with a sharp, uncomfortable purpose. She watched Jack, observed his every move, listened to every word he spoke. His hands, she noticed, were calloused from work, yet they moved with a surprising grace when he was adjusting a bridle or grooming a horse. They were not the rough, clumsy hands she might have expected from a lifetime spent mucking stalls. There was an intelligence in their movement, a quiet precision that spoke of training, perhaps even of artistry. His nails were clipped short, but she never saw the deep grime that usually clung to the hands of the other stable hands. He always seemed to wash them thoroughly, almost meticulously. She remembered a conversation they had shared weeks ago about books. She had mentioned a particularly obscure volume of poetry, and Jack had not only known it, but had quoted passages, his memory flawless. He had even discussed its philosophical undertones, insights that few educated men, let alone stable boys, would possess. At the time, she had attributed it to a keen natural mind, a diamond in the rough. Now she felt a tightening in her chest. Diamonds in the rough did not quote classical poetry with such ease. One afternoon, she found Jack alone in the main tack room, a large, well-lit space filled with the rich smell of leather and saddle soap. Bridles hung in neat rows, gleaming bits catching the light. Saddles rested on wooden stands, their stirrups polished to a high shine. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight pouring through the high windows. Jack was meticulously oiling a saddle, his brow furrowed in concentration. "May I help?" Eleanor asked, her voice a little steadier than she felt. The words felt formal, constrained, even here. Jack looked up, his gray eyes widening slightly in surprise. "Lady Eleanor, of course. There are some loose straps that need polishing. They're in that basket by the door." He gestured with his oil-smeared hand towards a wicker basket tucked against the wall. Eleanor walked toward it, her gaze sweeping over the organized chaos of the room. It was a space of practical utility, yet it possessed an underlying order that spoke of a careful hand. She knelt beside the basket, its woven sides rough against her fingers. Inside, a jumble of leather straps, polishing claws, and small metal buckles lay intertwined. She began to sort through them, her fingers deftly separating the pieces. As she reached into a particularly deep corner of the basket, her hand brushed against something cold and smooth, something distinctly out of place amidst the rough leather and canvas. Her fingers closed around it, a small, solid object. She pulled it out, her breath catching in her throat. It was a ring, a signet ring. It was heavy, made of dark, polished silver, almost black in its luster. The metal felt cool against her skin. It was not a simple band, nor was it a common ring worn for adornment. This was a ring of purpose, of lineage. Her gaze fell to the face of the ring, where a crest was intricately engraved. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm that echoed in her ears. The symbols on the crest swam before her eyes for a moment, then snapped into terrifying focus. A rearing griffin, its wings spread wide, a crown perched upon its head. Below it, a shield emblazoned with 3 interlocking oak leaves. She had seen it before, countless times. On the Duke's personal carriage, stitched into the banners that hung in the Great Hall, carved into the stone lintel above the entrance to Beaumont Hall. It was the Beaumont crest, the distinctive mark of Duke Alaric. The air in the tack room suddenly felt thin, suffocating. The scent of leather became acrid, the sunlight too harsh. Her fingers locked around the signet ring, the cold metal feeling like a brand against her skin. The realization dawned with sickening clarity, a brutal truth that crashed over her like a tidal wave. Jack, The kind, charming stable boy who had offered her comfort and laughter. The man whose hands had brushed hers with such tender intimacy. The man she had allowed herself to feel for was him. He was Duke Alaric Beaumont. The cold metal of the signet ring pressed into Eleanor's palm, the intricate Beaumont crest biting into her skin. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat as if a physical fist had slammed into her chest. The world, for a moment, tilted on its axis. Her mind, usually so precise, swam in a dizzying current of denial and dawning horror. It was impossible. It had to be. This was a cruel jest, a terrible mistake. Yet the crest, etched with stark clarity, screamed the truth. Her fingers locked around the small, heavy band. The familiar weight of it felt like a brand. She remembered the Duke's hands during their formal greetings, the flash of a similar ring, though she had paid it little mind then, consumed by her own anxieties. Now that fleeting image returned with a sickening clarity, twisting her stomach into knots. The stable, once her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap, its comforting smells of hay and horse sweat turning stale and suffocating. A faint clatter of hooves echoed from deeper within the stable, a sound that usually soothed her. Now it grated on her ears, each click an accusation. She had to find him. She had to see him, to make him deny it, to shatter this terrible illusion before it completely consumed her. Her legs felt heavy, like leaden pillars, yet a frantic urgency propelled her forward. She walked past stalls where horses munched contentedly, their soft breaths misting the air. Their innocent presence felt like a mockery of the storm raging inside her. He was there, as he always was, tending to a chestnut mare named Willow, his back to her. The familiar sight, his broad shoulders, the way his dark hair fell boyishly across his forehead, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. This man, this kind, honest, laughing man, could not possibly be the cold, imposing Duke. The dissonance was a physical ache, a tearing sensation within her very soul. "Jack," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper she barely recognized as her own. He straightened slowly, turning with that easy, natural grace she had come to adore. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, met hers. For a fleeting second, they held their usual warmth, a hint of his familiar, teasing smile playing on his lips. Then he saw the ring, clutched so tightly in her hand, and the smile vanished. His face, usually so expressive, became a mask, shuttered and unreadable. The air in the stable thickened, growing heavy with unspoken words, with dawning realization. He knew she knew. Eleanor took a step closer, her hand shaking so violently the ring almost slipped from her grasp. "This," she said, her voice gaining a desperate, brittle strength. "This belongs to you." She held it out, not offering it, but presenting it like a piece of damning evidence. The small, rough-hewn wooden horse he had carved for her lay forgotten in her other pocket, a cruel contrast to the cold metal in her fingers. His gaze dropped to the ring, then lifted slowly back to her face. His eyes, once so full of light, now held a deep, profound sadness, a guarded resignation. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply stood there, letting the silence stretch, thick and suffocating, between them. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silence that confirmed every terrifying suspicion that had just begun to bloom in her mind. The smell of fresh hay seemed to mock her, reminding her of all the carefree moments they had shared in this very place. Moments now tainted, irrevocably soiled by deceit. "Tell me," she demanded, her voice rising, edged with a raw, agonizing plea. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me this is a prank, a joke you play on all the silly girls who wander into your stable." Her chest was tight, her lungs burning for air. She needed him to laugh, to dismiss it, to be her Jack again. He took a slow, deep breath, his gaze unwavering, but the storm in his eyes deepened. The casual posture, the relaxed shoulders, began to subtly shift. A rigidity, a subtle formality, began to settle upon him, like a cloak slowly being draped over his frame. It was a transformation, low and agonizing, right before her eyes. The rugged, honest stable boy was dissolving, melting away, revealing something far more imposing, far more terrifying beneath. "Eleanor," he said, his voice now deeper, resonant, completely devoid of the gruff, familiar warmth she had grown to cherish. It was the voice of the Duke, measured and authoritative, the voice that had haunted her from across the dining hall. The sound sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins, chilling her to the bone. Every single conversation, every laugh, every shared glance, every gentle touch, replayed in her mind, now seen through this horrifying new lens. She staggered back a step, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a gasp that threatened to tear from her throat. The stables spun around her, the familiar wooden beams, the straw scattered on the floor, the dappled sunlight filtering through the high windows, all became distorted, unreal. She felt as though she were drowning, submerged in a cold, dark water, unable to find purchase, unable to breathe. You, you liar, she choked out, the words catching, sharp and jagged, in her throat. Her eyes welled with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow yet. They were tears of pure, unadulterated shock and a burgeoning, agonizing sense of betrayal. How could he? How could he have done this? He took a step towards her, his hand reaching out, a gesture of comfort she had once welcomed. But now it felt like a predatory movement, a hand of deceit. Eleanor, please, let me explain. His voice held a note of desperation, but it was lost to her, drowned out by the roaring in her ears. Explain? What could possibly explain this? The man who had listened to her fears, who had offered her solace, who had made her laugh and feel truly seen, was the very man she was forced to marry. He was the cold, distant figure she dreaded, the one who held her family's fate in his hands. He had played her, he had toyed with her emotions, her deepest vulnerabilities, under the guise of an honest, simple man. The humiliation was a hot, searing brand across her cheeks. Explain what? She spat, her voice trembling with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. Explain how you found it amusing to watch me pour out my heart to you, believing you to be someone else. Explain how you enjoyed my innocence, my foolish trust. Her chest heaved with each word, the anger slowly eclipsing the shock, burning away the pain. He stood before her, no longer the stable boy, but the Duke, his tall frame radiating an undeniable power, an authority that now felt suffocating. The rough linen shirt he wore, once part of his disguise, now seemed to hang differently, revealing the subtle contours of a more refined physique. His hands, once calloused from honest labor, seemed cleaner, longer, more elegant. Every detail of Jack was now overlaid with the Duke, creating a monstrous, two-headed figure in her mind. I only wanted to know you, he began, his voice softer now, pleading as if he sensed her fragile state, to see who you truly were, away from the expectations. His words struck her like physical blows. How dare he? How dare he claim to want to know her when he had built their entire connection on a lie? The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had revealed more of herself to Jack than she ever had to anyone, and all the while he had been judging her, dissecting her, all to decide if she was worthy of his title. It felt like an invasion, a violation of her very soul. Her vision blurred again, but this time it was with the stinging onset of tears, hot and relentless. They streamed down her face, tears of profound hurt, of crushing disappointment, of a trust irrevocably broken. The beautiful, tentative connection she had nurtured in the stables, the one small, genuine hope in her bleak future, had been a sham, a cruel, elaborate deception orchestrated by the very man she was meant to fear. You thought I was a puppet, did you not? She whispered, her voice raw with emotion. A thing to be tested, to be observed, to be judged for your entertainment. Her gaze, though tear-filled, was now sharp, piercing him with a pain that mirrored her own. You wanted to know the real me, Duke. This is the real me, broken, betrayed, and utterly disgusted by your cruelty. He tried to step closer again, his hand still extended. Eleanor, my intention was never to hurt you. I merely wanted an honest connection, something real. His words, meant to soothe, only ignited a deeper, more furious fire within her. An honest connection? He spoke of honesty while standing before her, revealed as a master of deceit. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking arrogance, made her blood boil. The quiet strength she usually possessed, her composed exterior, shattered completely. All that remained was a raw, visceral wave of indignation. She felt the tremor begin in her fingertips, spreading rapidly through her arms, through her entire body. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her face, she knew, must be a mask of blotchy red and tear-streaked anger. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, in outrage. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her, stealing her breath. He stood there, still attempting to explain, his lips moving but no sound reached her ears. His voice was a distant hum, swallowed by the deafening roar of her own shattered emotions. All she could see was his face, the face of Jack, now irreversibly merged with the cold, calculating eyes of the Duke. The man who had been her confidant, her brief flicker of joy, was merely a costume, a role played to assess her worth. The wooden horse in her pocket felt heavy, suddenly a useless, meaningless trinket, a cruel reminder of the lie. The kindness, the gentle teasing, the shared laughter, all of it now seemed hollow, tainted, a calculated performance. She had opened her heart, a heart already burdened and scarred by duty, and he had trampled on it with his elaborate game. A surge of pure, unadulterated fury coursed through her veins. It was a primal, instinctive reaction, born of pain so profound it demanded an outlet. Her hand, the one that still clutched the damning signet ring, flew up. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. It was a desperate, visceral response to the searing humiliation, the crushing betrayal, the utter destruction of her fragile hope. Her palm connected with his cheek with a sharp, resounding crack that echoed through the quiet stable. The sound was shockingly loud in the sudden, stunned silence. The force of it snapped his head to the side, leaving a stark red mark blooming on his skin. His eyes, when they slowly returned to hers, were wide with shock, a mixture of pain and disbelief. Eleanor stood frozen for a single agonizing heartbeat, her hands stinging, her chest heaving. The sheer audacity of her action, the raw, uncontrolled emotion that had driven it, stunned even herself. But the feeling of burning humiliation on her face, the crushing weight of his deceit, was far more potent than any lingering shock. Then, without another word, without another glance, she turned and fled. Her tears, no longer a trickle, became a torrent, blinding her as she stumbled through the stable doors, out into the harsh, indifferent light of the courtyard. The world around her was a blur of motion, a kaleidoscope of pain and anger. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she ran, driven by an overwhelming need to escape, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the man who had so utterly shattered her world. Every step was a fresh stab of agony, a testament to the million pieces her heart had just fragmented into. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, echoing through the silent, oppressive grandeur of Beaumont Hall. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat, a ragged, broken sound. Her cheeks burned, not just from the humiliation of the past moments, but from the searing sting of her own hand against his face. She pressed her back against the cold wood, sliding slowly to the floor, her legs suddenly weak and trembling. The elegant gown she wore, chosen with such care for her position, felt like a heavy shroud. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down her face, blurring the ornate patterns of the wallpaper, turning the room into a watercolor of despair. The world had fractured. Every shared smile, every gentle touch, every word of comfort from Jack now felt like a cruel, calculated mockery. He had seen her at her most vulnerable and confided in her deepest fears, all while wearing a mask. The scent of hay and horses, once a comforting memory, now brought a wave of nausea tainted by the stench of deceit. She covered her face with her hands, whimpering softly, a sound she had not made since childhood. Her chest ached with a profound, suffocating hurt, a pain far deeper than any she had known. Hours bled into one another. The light outside her window shifted from the golden warmth of late afternoon to the deep indigo of dusk. Eleanor remained huddled on the floor, occasionally rising to pace the length of her chamber, her silk slippers barely whispering against the polished floorboards. Her mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of fragmented memories. She saw Jack's mischievous grin as he taught her to groom a mare, felt the surprising strength of his hand guiding hers on the reins, heard his low, comforting murmur when she spoke of her fears for the future. Then, with a sickening lurch, these images would twist into the Duke's impassive face across the dinner table. His eyes, those piercing gray eyes, now seeming to mock her from every corner of the room. A soft tap at the door startled her. Eleanor froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She held her breath, listening. A rustle, then silence. A sliver of white paper appeared beneath the door, pushed gently into her room. She stared at it, her eyes wide and wary. It was a note from him. She knew it, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. For a long moment, she simply watched the paper as if it might bite her. Then, driven by a perverse curiosity, she slowly uncurled her stiff body and crept towards it. Her fingers, still trembling, picked up the folded parchment. The Duke's crest was not on it, a small mercy. The handwriting was bold, decisive, yet familiar. It was Jack's hand. Her breath caught. "Eleanor, please, I must speak with you. Give me a chance to explain." Alaric. The name felt like a brand burned into her skin. Alaric. Not Jack. Never Jack again. She crumpled the note in her fist, her anger flaring anew. Explain what? How he had so cleverly played her? How he had watched her spill her deepest secrets, her most foolish hopes, to the very man who held her future in his cold, calculating hands. The paper tore under the force of her grip, a satisfying rip that did little to ease the turmoil inside her. She tossed the mangled note into the unlit fireplace, watching it land amidst the cold ashes. The next morning brought another note, slipped under her door with the breakfast tray. This one was longer, more urgent in its tone. "My lady, I know I have caused you pain. I beg you, do not judge me, for you hear my reasons. I would not intentionally hurt you. Please grant me just a few moments of your time. Alaric." The scent of fresh bread and brewed tea filled the room, a stark contrast to the bitter taste in her mouth. Eleanor pushed the tray aside, her stomach churning. She wanted no sustenance, no comfort. She wanted to disappear. She spent the day avoiding all contact. When a maid came to inquire if she wished for fresh water or a change of clothes, Eleanor curtly refused, feigning a headache. The maid's footsteps retreated, leaving her once more in the suffocating silence. She walked to the window, peering out at the sprawling gardens, the perfectly manicured lawns, Beaumont Hall, her gilded cage. And now she realized it was also the stage for his cruel masquerade. The humiliation of it all washed over her in hot waves. How many servants knew? How many had watched her innocent conversations with Jack, exchanging knowing glances, perhaps even smirking at her naivete? The thought made her want to scream. The day progressed, marked by the insistent delivery of more notes. Each one held a growing desperation, a plea that seemed to vibrate with genuine remorse. "Eleanor, I cannot bear your silence. This silence is worse than any anger you could direct at me. I value your good opinion more than you know. Please think of our families. Think of what is at stake. I implore you." Alaric. His words clawed at her resolve, chipping away at the fortress she had built around her shattered heart. She read them, her eyes scanning the familiar script, each letter now a poignant reminder of the man she had believed him to be. The contradiction gnawed at her. Jack had been kind, thoughtful, genuinely interested in her world. He had shown her a tenderness she had never expected to find, especially not in a man bound by duty to her. He had made her laugh, truly laugh, a sound that had been absent from her life for far too long. He had given her a small, rough-hewn wooden horse, a symbol of their simple, honest connection. That small horse sat on her dressing table now, a cruel artifact of a vanished dream. Every time her gaze fell upon it, a fresh wave of betrayal washed over her. But the Duke was cold, distant, powerful. The man she was forced to marry to save her family from ruin. The man she had resented for his power, for his perceived indifference to her plight. The man whose piercing gray eyes had unsettled her, yet also held a strange, undeniable allure. How could they be the same person? How could the man who had elicited such warmth and affection from her be the man she had agreed to marry out of desperation? The irony was a bitter poison in her veins. She sank onto the plush armchair near the window, the soft velvet offering little comfort. Her eyes were dry now, but a dull ache throbbed behind them. She felt utterly depleted, hollowed out by the emotional storm. She had spent a lifetime guarding her heart, building walls against the harsh realities of her family's decline, against the cold calculations of society. Yet, in the stables, with a man she believed to be a simple stable boy, those walls had crumbled, brick by careful brick. She had allowed herself to feel, to hope, to dream of a life where genuine connection mattered more than title or wealth. And he had exploited it. He had watched her bare her soul, a performance designed to gauge her character, to test her suitability as his duchess. The thought made her stomach clench with disgust. He had tricked her, played her for a fool. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her, stealing her breath. She imagined the whispers, the knowing looks, the subtle snickers from the servants who were undoubtedly aware of the Duke's charade. It was unbearable. Another note arrived, slipped under the door as the evening shadows lengthened. This one was shorter, starker. I will wait outside your door until you agree to speak. I will not leave. I owe you an explanation, and you deserve to hear it. Alaric. Eleanor stared at the door. She could almost feel his presence on the other side, a silent, unyielding force. She pictured him there, perhaps leaning against the wall, his dark hair falling across his forehead, his gray eyes, now surely troubled, fixed on her closed door. The image stirred a flicker of something within her, a sensation she immediately tried to extinguish. Was it sympathy? No, it could not be. It was exasperation, she decided, a weary exasperation at his stubbornness. She considered ignoring him, letting him stand there all night, let him feel a fraction of the discomfort she felt. But then, a practical thought pierced through her emotional haze. The servants would notice. Her continued refusal would become a scandal, another layer of shame to add to her already heavy burden. And he was right. She did deserve an explanation. Not because she would forgive him, not because she understood, but because she needed to know. She needed to understand the depths of his deception, the precise nature of his motives. She needed to hear him account for the pain he had inflicted. Her throat felt raw, her voice raspy from disuse. Go away, she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was a pause, a tense silence from the other side of the door. Then his voice, low and resonant, filtered through the wood. I cannot, Eleanor, not until you speak to me. His persistence was infuriating, yet also relentless. It reminded her of Jack's quiet determination when trying to soothe a skittish horse, his unwavering patience. The memory was unwelcome. She pushed it away. She took a deep, shaky breath, her hands clenching at her sides. She was exhausted, drained, her mind a tangled knot of anger, sorrow, and a strange, aching curiosity. She wanted answers. She needed answers. And perhaps, just perhaps, she needed to see the man who had worn two faces, to confront him, to demand clarity from the chaos he had wrought. Fine, she called out, her voice thin but firm. I will see you tomorrow in the morning room. No later than 10 o'clock. Another pause, then a sound of relief she could almost feel. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you. His voice was hoarse, edged with what sounded like genuine emotion. She heard the faint sound of his retreating footsteps, fading down the long corridor. The silence returned, but it felt different now. No longer suffocating, but heavy with anticipation. She had made a decision, a reluctant concession, but it was a decision born not of reconciliation, but of a desperate need for understanding. Her heart, still heavy with unresolved pain, braced itself for the confrontation to come. She would face him, not as the innocent girl he had deceived in the stables, but as Lady Eleanor Vance, demanding the truth. The cool, vast expanse of the drawing room stretched before Eleanor, silent as a tomb. A single lamp on a polished mahogany table cast a pool of soft yellow light, but shadows clung to the corners of the room like secrets. The air, usually thick with the scent of beeswax and old money, now held a faint, almost metallic tang, sharp with unspoken words. Her hands were clenched so tightly her fingernails bit into her palms, a small, welcome pain. Duke Alaric Beaumont stood by the tall, arched window, his back to her, silhouetted against the dark velvet drapes. He did not turn immediately, and the prolonged silence pressed down on Eleanor, heavier than any physical weight. Her chest felt constricted, a tight band around her ribs, making each breath a conscious effort. She could hear the frantic beat of her own heart, a drum against her ears. This was not the opulent, cold duke she had first met. This was not the rough, kind stable boy who had carved a wooden horse for her. This was both, and neither, a terrifying, unknown entity. Finally he turned. The lamplight caught the sharp planes of his face, accentuating the tired lines etched around his piercing gray eyes. There was no arrogance in his posture, no dismissive air. Instead, he looked weary, vulnerable even. Her anger, so hot and fierce only moments before, flickered, momentarily confused by this unexpected image. She had expected defiance, perhaps a calculated apology, but not this raw, exposed presence. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, hesitant rumble that was neither the Duke's command nor Jack's easy banter. It was something else entirely, tinged with a deep, palpable regret. "Thank you for coming." She did not respond, merely stared at him, her hazel eyes narrowed, searching for a false note, a hint of the deception that had so thoroughly shredded her trust. The scent of ozone seemed to linger in the air between them, a ghost of the storm that had passed. She could not speak. The words were jammed in her throat, a choked knot of pain and fury. He walked slowly towards the large fireplace, not looking at her directly, his gaze fixed on the unlit hearth. "I know there are no words to ease your pain," he began, his voice gaining a quiet strength, "or to excuse my actions." He paused, and Eleanor thought she saw his shoulders rise and fall with a deep, unsteady breath. "I betrayed your trust. I understand that, and I regret it more than you can know." Eleanor's lips parted, but still no sound came. She felt a strange buzzing behind her ears, a disorientation from the sheer weight of the moment. Her fingers locked around the smooth, cool wood of the armchair nearest her, anchoring herself to something solid in a world that felt suddenly fluid and uncertain. She watched him, waiting, every fiber of her being tense and coiled. He finally looked at her, his eyes holding a profound depth she had never seen before. "I needed to know you," he said simply, the words hanging heavy in the silent room. "Not Lady Eleanor Vance, the impoverished noblewoman marrying a duke for her family's salvation. Not the delicate beauty admired in ballrooms. I needed to know the woman beneath the title, beneath the expectations, beneath the facade that society forces upon us all." His gaze flickered away towards the shadowed corners of the room. "For years, Eleanor, my life has been a charade. Every woman I met, every conversation, felt calculated. They saw the title, the wealth, the power. They saw a means to an end, a comfortable future, a stepping stone to higher social standing." His voice was low, laced with a bitterness that was starkly unfamiliar. "They never saw me. They never cared to." Eleanor listened, a small, cold part of her still screaming with rage. But another part, the part that remembered Jack's gentle hands and kind smile, began to stir. The flickering lamplight danced in his eyes, making them seem deeper, more earnest. She recalled the whispered gossip about the Duke's aloofness, his supposed disinterest in society, and now she saw a different reason for it, a reason rooted in a profound loneliness. "I became weary of it," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, as if confessing a long-held secret. "The endless superficiality, the polite smiles that hid ambition, the empty compliments. I yearned for something real, something genuine, a connection not born of convenience or status, but of shared spirit." He took a step closer, his eyes pleading for understanding. "When your family's plight came to my attention and the marriage was proposed, I saw an opportunity, a desperate one, perhaps, and certainly cruel in its execution, but an opportunity nonetheless." He paused, swallowing hard. "I wanted to see if the woman I was to marry possessed a heart, a mind, a spirit that could look past my title, past the cold reputation, and perhaps, just perhaps, find something worth caring for." Eleanor felt a tremor run through her. His words struck a chord deep within her, a place where her own unspoken desires resided. She too had longed for authenticity, for a connection beyond her family's faded name or the desperate need for security. She remembered her own cynical thoughts about marriage, seeing it only as a duty, a transaction. Had she been so different from those women he described in her initial assessment of him? The thought stung. I took on the guise of a stable boy, he explained, his voice becoming steadier, more confident now that he had started. A position far removed from my station, one that would strip away all pretense. I wanted to see if you would treat Jack with the same kindness, the same curiosity, the same respect you would show the Duke. His gaze held hers, unwavering. And you did, Eleanor. You showed Jack more genuine kindness than most have ever shown Duke Alaric Beaumont. A single tear, hot and defiant, escaped Eleanor's eye and traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of anger now, but of a complex, painful recognition. He had seen her too, not just the Lady Vance, but the woman who found solace in the simple beauty of horses, who yearned for quiet conversations, who harbored a secret tenderness. The realization was a sudden sharp ache in her chest. Every time you came to the stables, he continued, his voice softening. Every time you laughed at one of Jack's crude jokes. Every time you looked at him with those bright, honest eyes, my hope grew. My foolish, desperate hope that I had found someone truly remarkable. Someone who could see past the gold in the stone to the man within. He took another step, closer still, and Eleanor did not recoil. The scent of him, clean and faintly of leather, now felt familiar, comforting, yet still laced with the bitter sting of revelation. I saw your resilience, your quiet strength, your fierce loyalty to your family. I saw your compassion, and I found myself falling. He stopped, the word hanging in the air between them, raw and exposed. Falling for the woman who spoke so freely to a stable boy, who did not judge by outward appearances, who possessed a soul as deep and true as any I have ever encountered. Eleanor's breath hitched. She remembered her own flustered confusion, the forbidden feelings, the heart-pounding moments when Jack's hand had brushed hers. She had dismissed them as folly, as an impossible, dangerous infatuation. Now she understood the depth of the deception and the depth of his desperate yearning behind it. The betrayal was still a jagged wound, but she could see the reason, the profound loneliness that had driven him to such extreme measures. I know my method was abhorrent, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I know I hurt you deeply, and for that, I will spend a lifetime seeking your forgiveness, if you will only grant me the chance. He extended a hand, not reaching for her, but offering it, palm up, in a gesture of pure vulnerability. But please, Eleanor, try to understand. My intentions, however flawed my execution, were born of a desire for truth, a desperate longing for a true partner, not just a wife of convenience. Eleanor gazed at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. The gray eyes, once cold and distant, now held a pleading sincerity that was undeniable. The carefully constructed walls around her own heart, the ones built of duty and resignation, began to crumble, leaving her exposed to the truth of his words. She saw not just the Duke who had deceived her, but the man who had been Jack, the man who had craved genuine connection, mirroring her own deepest, most hidden desires. A fragile understanding, tenuous and still painful, began to form in the quiet space between them. The study's silence pressed around Eleanor, heavy with unspoken words and lingering pain. Old leather and beeswax scented the air, reminding her of Beaumont Hall's sterile grandeur. She watched Alaric. His gray eyes showed a vulnerability she hadn't expected from the formidable Duke. Betrayal still ached in her chest, but understanding began to grow. He had sought authenticity, a quality she also yearned for. She saw the stern family portraits on the wall. The burden of his lineage, the weight of expectation, resonated with a shared loneliness in her own heart. His desperate path to find a companion was clear. The wound still smarted, raw and deep, yet his earnest confession began to chip away at the wall she had built around herself. She remembered Jack's gruff kindness in the stables, his easy laughter, his simple wisdom. That man, not the Duke, had truly reached her. "I understand your desire for truth," Eleanor whispered, her voice soft, her fingers locked around the delicate porcelain teacup. She knew if she let go, she might drop it. "But your chosen path, Alaric," inflicted a deep wound. A single tear escaped her eye. The humiliation, the shock of the signet ring, the slap that still stung her palm all returned. Alaric moved from his desk, his eyes on hers. He knelt before her, humbling himself. "I know, Eleanor," he said, his voice raw. "I beg your forgiveness. I was a fool, blinded by fear and bitter lessons. I used the stable boy's mask to truly see you." He reached out, cupping her tear-streaked face. His light touch sent a familiar tremor. It was the same touch that had steadied her in the stables, sparking warmth. "I have known only duty," she confessed, her own mask crumbling. "My life has been a series of sacrifices. I longed for someone to see me, simply Eleanor, not Lady Vance, someone honest." She met his gaze, seeing not the imposing Duke, but Jack's earnest eyes, the man who carved her a wooden horse, who listened without judgment. "And I, Eleanor," Alaric replied, wiping her tear, "I have known only suspicion. Every smile, every kind word filtered through my title and wealth. I craved a pure connection, untainted by expectation. In the stables you saw only Jack, a simple man. You spoke with a kindness and authenticity I had never known." His eyes pleaded, a silent conversation of shared vulnerabilities and hopes passing between them. Eleanor thought of her mother's locket, a reminder of duty. She had felt like a pawn in a game not her own. Now, in this quiet room, a choice appeared, a genuine partnership, a love built on shared humanity, not title or necessity. "It was cruel," she whispered, hurt still in her voice but softening. "But Jack reached me. He spoke to my heart. He showed kindness when I felt alone, made me laugh when I thought I could not." She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "And you, Alaric, were Jack. That complicates everything, yet simplifies it." He rose, offering his hand. "I am both men, Eleanor. The Duke of Beaumont Hall and Jack, who longs for a true companion. I offered my title and fortune to save your family. Now I offer my heart, all of it, hoping you choose to accept it, not because you must." Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand. It was strong, a duke's hand, but she remembered the calluses from the stables, the warmth when he taught her to groom a horse. Her heart fluttered, a wild bird finding its cage door open. Her mind raced through their hours in the stables, the intimate conversations, shared silences. He had seen past her faded gowns, her quiet demeanor, to the woman beneath. He had sought the true Eleanor, as she sought a true connection. A slow smile touched her lips, tentative, then blossoming with hope. "I choose you, Alaric," she said, her voice clear and firm, doubt dissolving. She placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwining as if always meant to be there. An undeniable current warmed her. The touch was new and familiar, a culmination of their stolen moments. Beaumont Hall, once a cold symbol of sacrifice, now softened with a different light. Wedding preparations continued, but for Eleanor they transformed. Each gown fitting, each arrangement discussion, no longer felt like a march to a gilded cage. Instead, it was a path to a life she dared not dream, built on understanding. On their wedding day, autumn sun streamed through the Beaumont Chapel's stained glass, casting light. The air, usually solemn, felt charged with anticipation. Eleanor walked down the aisle, her heart beating a steady peace, not fear. Her simple white gown, elegant, felt like an expression of her spirit. She clutched her small bouquet, her gaze fixed on Alaric at the altar. He stood tall and regal, every inch the Duke. Yet when their eyes met, she saw Jack. She saw the man who had knelt before her, bared his soul, sought something real in artifice. His lips curved into a subtle, reassuring smile, a private moment. It was a smile only for her, a silent acknowledgement of their secret, their journey. As she reached him, Alaric extended his hand, his touch firm. This was not a forced union, but a conscious choice, a partnership forged in intimacy and painful honesty. Throughout the ceremony, their hands remained clasped. Their vows, spoken clearly, carried weight beyond tradition. They were promises between two people who stripped away titles and expectations and found each other. When the ceremony concluded, they stood as husband and wife. Alaric turned to Eleanor. His gray eyes, once piercing and aloof, now held warmth. He leaned down, lips brushing her ear. "My Duchess," he whispered. "My Eleanor." She looked up, a radiant smile on her lips, tears of joy in her hazel eyes. "My Duke," she replied. "My Jack." Their gazes met, a silent language of promise. A future built not on obligation, but deep affection and understanding, forged in an unlikely place. The false barriers had fallen, replaced by an unbreakable, unspoken bond.